My mother stood on my porch with a suitcase in her hand. 9 years. That's how long it had been since I heard her voice. I opened the door slowly, still holding my coffee mug. Rain dripped from the edge of the roof behind her. Her hair was grayer than I remembered. Her coat looked too thin for the weather. "Daniel," she said, "can I come in?" I didn't answer right away. My hand tightened around the mug. 9 years ago, this woman told me I was no longer her son. She said it at my own wedding, in front of everyone, before walking out the door with my father and my brother. She said Naomi would never be family. She said I was throwing my life away. I looked past her now, out at the street, half expecting to see my father's truck parked at the curb. It wasn't there. She was alone. I asked. "He's not well, Daniel." Her voice cracked on my name. "I need to talk to you, please." I stepped back from the door, not because I forgave her, but because it was raining harder now, and some part of me still couldn't leave an old woman standing in the cold. Some habits don't disappear, even after 9 years of silence. She walked into my living room like she was afraid to touch anything. Her eyes moved across the family photos on the wall. Me and Naomi at our 10th anniversary. Our daughter Maya blowing out candles on her 6th birthday. A photo of the 3 of us at the lake last summer. My mother's eyes lingered longest on that last one. "She's beautiful," my mother said quietly, looking at Maya's photo. "She has your eyes." I said nothing. I wasn't going to make this easy for her. Naomi came out of the kitchen, drying her hands on a towel. She stopped when she saw who was sitting on our couch. For a moment, nobody moved. 9 years of memory passed between the two women in complete silence. My mother stood up. "Naomi, it's good to see you." Naomi's jaw tightened. She didn't extend her hand. "Mrs. Whitfield," she said, formal and cold. "What are you doing here?" "I need to talk to my son." "You mean the son you told to choose between his family and his wife?" Naomi's voice stayed level, but I could hear the years of pain underneath it. "The one you called and made a mistake at his own wedding in front of 200 people?" My mother's eyes dropped to the floor. "I know what I did. Do you?" Naomi asked. I put my hand gently on Naomi's shoulder. She looked at me, and I saw the question in her eyes. "Do you want me to leave you two alone?" I shook my head slightly. Whatever my mother had to say, Naomi deserved to hear it too. She had earned that right a long time ago. Naomi sat down beside me on the opposite couch, arms crossed. My mother remained standing, twisting her hands together like she used to do when I was a boy and I'd done something wrong. "Say what you came to say," I told her. She took a breath. "Your father has cancer, stage 4. The doctors give him maybe 6 months." The words hit the room like a stone dropped into still water. I felt Naomi's hand find mine even after everything, even after the years of hurt this family had caused her. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and I meant it, even though the man had disowned me the same day he called my wife a disgrace to the family name. "He wants to see you," my mother continued. "Before," she stopped, unable to finish the sentence. "He wants to make things right." I felt something twist in my chest. 9 years of silence, and now, only because death was standing at the door, they wanted to talk. "Where was this 6 years ago?" I asked. "Where was this when Maya was born, and you never even sent a card? Where was this when I called on Dad's birthday and he hung up on me because I didn't apologize for marrying my wife?" My mother flinched at every word, but she didn't argue. She just stood there and took it, which was almost more unsettling than if she had fought back. She reached into her purse and pulled out a folded photograph. Her hands were shaking as she held it out to me. I took it, unfolded it, and felt my throat tighten. It was a picture of me at maybe 7 years old, sitting on my father's shoulders at a county fair. I was laughing. He was smiling in a way I barely remembered him smiling. "I kept this in my wallet the whole time," she said. "Every single day for 9 years, I looked at this picture and I thought about calling you. I was too proud. Your father was too stubborn. And every year that passed, it got harder to admit we were wrong." "You were wrong the moment you walked out of my wedding," I said. "It shouldn't have taken you 9 years and a diagnosis to figure that out." Naomi spoke up then, her voice quiet but firm. "Mrs. Whitfield, I need you to understand something. I've spent 9 years watching my husband miss his family. I've watched him flinch every time somebody mentions Thanksgiving, because that used to be a day he loved before your family made it impossible. I've watched him stand in the driveway on Christmas morning, staring at his phone, wondering if this would be the year you called." My mother's eyes filled with tears. "I didn't know." "You didn't ask," Naomi said. The silence that followed felt heavier than anything spoken. Outside, the rain continued to fall against the windows, steady and unrelenting, like it had nowhere else to be. I thought back to the wedding day. The white tent in my father-in-law's backyard, the string lights, Naomi in her mother's old dress, altered to fit her, my mother in a pale blue suit, pulling me aside just before the ceremony. "Are you sure about this?" she had asked me then. "Think about your children, Daniel. Think about how hard their life will be. Their life will be hard because people like you make it hard," I had told her, "not because of who I love." She hadn't spoken to me since, not one phone call, not one letter. 9 birthdays passed without a word. 9 Christmases where the only family in my house was the family I had built myself, brick by brick, out of nothing. "Why now?" I asked her again, sharper this time. "And don't just say it's because of Dad. There's something else. I can see it on your face." My mother hesitated. She glanced at Naomi, then back at me. "Your brother is trying to take control of the family business before your father passes," she said finally. "He wants to change the will. He wants to make sure you get nothing, not because of the wedding, but because he's always resented that you left and built something successful on your own, without the family name behind you." I felt my stomach drop. So this isn't about making peace. This is about the business. "No," my mother said quickly. "That's not why I'm here. I came because your father is dying and he wants to see his grandchild before he goes. I came because I miss my son, but your brother is planning something, and I thought you should know, before it's too late for that too." I stared at her for a long moment, trying to read the truth behind her tired eyes. 9 years of silence made it hard to trust anything she said now, even the parts that sounded sincere. "I need time to think," I finally said. My mother nodded slowly, gathering her purse from the couch. At the door, she turned back one more time. "Daniel, whatever you decide, I want you to know I am proud of the life you built." I should have said that a long time ago. She stepped out into the rain, and I watched her walk to a taxi waiting at the curb. No family truck, no father waiting to make amends himself. Just an old woman, alone, carrying 9 years of regret in a folded photograph. I closed the door and turned to Naomi. Her eyes were wet, but her voice was steady. "What are you going to do?" she asked. I didn't have an answer yet, but I knew one thing for certain. Whatever happened next would change everything. For my family, for my father, and for the daughter who had never once met her grandparents. The morning after my mother's visit, I stood at the kitchen window, watching the rain finally clear. Naomi was already up, making coffee, her back to me, shoulders tense in a way I recognized after 15 years of marriage. "You didn't sleep," she said, not turning around. "Neither did you." She poured 2 cups and handed me one without a word. We sat at the small table by the window, the same table where we'd had 1,000 ordinary mornings, and now this one felt anything but ordinary. "Tell me about them," Naomi said quietly. "The real story, not the version you give people at parties. I want to know who they were before the wedding." I turned my mug slowly in my hands, thinking back. My father, Walter Whitfield, built a small hardware supply business from nothing in the 1980s. By the time I was in high school, it had grown into a regional distribution company with 40 employees. He was proud of that. Proud in a way that sometimes made him hard to live with, because he believed the family name meant something, and anyone who threatened that name was a problem to be handled. My mother, Carol, had always been the quieter one, the one who smoothed things over after my father's temper flared. She never disagreed with him in front of other people. Not once, not that I ever saw. My brother Thomas was 2 years younger than me and had worked at the company since he graduated college. He'd always been ambitious, always looking for ways to prove himself to our father, and my leaving to start my own logistics company had never sat right with him. He saw it as an insult to the family, even before Naomi came into the picture. "When did you meet me?" Naomi asked, a small smile finally breaking through. "Junior year at State. You were studying nursing. I was failing a business statistics class and you tutored me because your roommate felt sorry for me. I felt sorry for you. You fell in love with me." "That came later," she said, and for a moment the weight in the room lifted just slightly. I remembered bringing her home for the first time. Thanksgiving, senior year. My father had been polite, distant, the kind of politeness that feels like a closed door. My mother had asked Naomi more questions about her family background than seemed necessary. "Where are your people from?" What does your father do? Small questions with sharp edges underneath. Thomas had barely spoken to her at all. I should have seen it then, the shape of what was coming. But I was young and in love, and I believed that time would soften my family the way it seemed to soften everything else. I was wrong. By the time we got engaged 2 years later, my father had made his position clear in a conversation I still remembered word for word. "This isn't about hate, Daniel," he'd told me, sitting behind his big oak desk at the company office. "This is about what people will think, about the business, about your children, and what kind of life they'll have. You're asking me to leave the woman I love because of what other people might think? I'm asking you to think clearly instead of with your heart." I had walked out of that office and didn't speak to him for 3 months. My mother called eventually, begged me to come to dinner, said we could work through it as a family. I believed her. I wanted to believe her. The wedding invitation had gone out to all of them. My mother RSVP'd yes for the whole family. I remember feeling relieved, thinking maybe things really would be different. They came. All 3 of them, dressed sharp, smiling for the photographers at the entrance. For the first hour I actually let myself believe it would be fine. Then my father stood up during the toasts. He didn't shout. That was the strange part. He spoke calmly, almost gently, which made it worse. He talked about tradition, about family legacy, about the weight of the Whitfield name, and then he said the words that ended things between us. "I hope Daniel understands what he's giving up today. Because from where I'm standing, this isn't the family I raised him to build." Some guests laughed nervously, thinking it was an awkward joke. Others went silent. My mother sat frozen in her chair. Thomas stared at his plate. I stood up in front of 200 people and told my father he was no longer welcome to speak for the Whitfield family, because as of that day I was building a new one. They left before the cake was cut. "I didn't know he said all that," Naomi said now, at our kitchen table 9 years later. "You never told me the exact words." "I didn't want you carrying them," I said. "You had enough to carry." She reached across the table and took my hand. "Daniel, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest." "Okay. Do you want to see him before he dies?" I looked out the window at the wet street at the tire tracks the taxi had left in the mud the night before. Somewhere across the state my father was lying in a bed, running out of time, and some old stubborn part of me still felt the sting of that toast like it happened yesterday. "I don't know," I admitted. "Part of me wants to walk away and let him die not knowing his granddaughter. Part of me knows that's not who I want to be." Maya wandered into the kitchen just then, still in her pajamas, hair messy from sleep. She was 8 years old, sharp as anything, and she picked up on tension in a room the way most adults couldn't. "Who was that lady last night?" she asked, climbing into the chair beside me. "The one who was crying on the porch." Naomi and I exchanged a look. "That was your grandmother," I said carefully. "My mom." Maya's eyes went wide. "I have a grandma? I thought you said your parents didn't want to be in our family." The bluntness of children. It cuts straighter than anything adults are capable of. "It's complicated, sweetheart," Naomi said gently. "Is she coming back?" Maya asked me. I hadn't planned to answer that question so soon, but Maya was looking at me with the kind of open curiosity that only children have. No judgment yet, no baggage, just questions. "I don't know yet," I told her honestly. "But if she does, I want you to know that whatever happened between me and her, it was never about you. You didn't do anything wrong, neither did your mom." Maya considered this with the seriousness only an 8-year-old can manage. "Was it because Mommy is black?" The kitchen went completely silent. Naomi's hand tightened slightly around her coffee mug. I hadn't wanted to have this conversation yet, not fully, not in these exact words, but Maya deserved honesty. "Yes," I said. "That's part of why." "That's stupid," Maya said simply, and went back to eating her cereal like she'd just settled the matter entirely. I almost laughed, except my throat was too tight for it. 3 days later, I got a call I wasn't expecting. Not from my mother, from a number I didn't recognize, a lawyer's office 2 hours away in the town where I grew up. "Mr. Whitfield, my name is Patricia Nguyen. I represent your father, Walter Whitfield, in matters relating to his estate." My stomach tightened. "Is this about the business?" "I'm not able to discuss specifics over the phone, but your father has requested a meeting. He'd like you present when certain documents are reviewed. Your brother has also been asking about the timeline of the will's finalization." There it was, exactly what my mother had warned me about. "When?" I asked. As soon as possible. Given his condition, sooner would be better. I hung up the phone and stood in my driveway for a long time, watching the neighbors' kids ride their bikes up and down the street, completely unaware that somewhere inside my house, my whole world was quietly rearranging itself. That evening, I told Naomi about the call. They're circling him already, she said, disgusted. Before he's even gone. That sounds like Thomas, I admitted. What are you going to do? I thought about my father's face in that old photograph, the county fair, the laughter, the version of him that existed before pride and business and image took over everything soft in him. I'm going to go see him, I said. Not for the business. Not even really for him. I need Maya to know where she comes from, the good and the bad of it. And I need to look him in the eye one more time before it's too late to say anything at all. Naomi studied my face for a long moment, then nodded. Then we go together, all three of us. I hadn't expected that. You'd do that? After everything. I'm not doing it for him, she said. I'm doing it for Maya. And for you, you've carried this long enough, Daniel. That night, I called my mother back for the first time in 9 years. She answered on the first ring, like she'd been waiting by the phone every hour since she left my porch. Daniel, she breathed. We're coming, I said. Me, Naomi, and Maya, this weekend. There was a long pause filled with what sounded like quiet crying. Thank you, she finally said. You don't know what this means. Don't thank me yet, I told her. I'm not doing this for forgiveness. I'm doing this for the truth. Whatever Thomas is planning, whatever games are being played around Dad's illness, I need to understand it before I walk back into that house. There's more you don't know, my mother said, her voice suddenly careful. About the business, about why your father really wants to see you. Then tell me now. Not over the phone, she said. Come this weekend. You'll understand everything when you get here. I hung up the phone with a knot of unease sitting heavy in my chest. 9 years of silence was about to break wide open, and something told me the truth. Waiting for me in that house was bigger than an old man's deathbed apology. The drive to my parents' house took 2 hours, and for most of it, nobody spoke. Maya sat in the back seat with her headphones on, watching the fields roll past the window. Naomi held my hand across the console, her thumb tracing small circles against my palm, the way she did when she could tell I was somewhere far away in my own head. You okay? She asked as we passed the sign for our old town. I don't know what I'm walking into, I admitted. That's the honest answer. The house looks smaller than I remembered. Funny how that happens. Places that once felt enormous in childhood shrink over the years into something almost ordinary. The oak tree in the front yard was taller. The paint on the porch railing was peeling in places it hadn't been before. My mother opened the door before we even reached it, like she'd been watching from the window. She looked older in daylight than she had on my porch, the exhaustion of caregiving etched into every line of her face. You came, she said, and her eyes went straight to Maya, hovering slightly behind Naomi's leg. You must be Maya. I'm your grandmother. Maya studied her carefully, the way she studied everything, then said, You're the lady who was crying. My mother let out a small, surprised laugh wet with emotion. Yes, I suppose I am. We didn't go inside the house first. My mother led us instead to a converted sunroom at the back, where a hospital bed had been set up facing the garden. My father lay propped against pillows, thinner than I had ever seen him, his skin pale, an oxygen tube resting beneath his nose. For a moment, none of us moved. 9 years compressed into a single held breath. Danny, my father said. His voice was rough, weaker than the voice I remembered booming across boardrooms and dinner tables alike. Nobody had called me Danny since I was a teenager, Dad. His eyes moved past me to Naomi, and something flickered across his face that I couldn't immediately name. Not quite regret, not quite shame. Something older and more complicated than either. Naomi, he said, thank you for coming. I know I have no right to ask that of you. I came for Maya, Naomi said evenly, not for you. He nodded slowly, accepting this without argument, which surprised me. The father I remembered never accepted anything without a fight. Then his eyes found Maya, and everything about him softened. Hello, he said quietly. You look just like your father did at your age. Maya walked forward, unafraid in the way only children can be. Are you sick? Very sick, he admitted. Are you going to die, Maya? Naomi started, but my father held up a weak hand. It's all right. Yes, I am going to die, probably soon. That's sad, Maya said simply, and then, without any prompting, she reached out and took his hand. My father's eyes filled with tears, and for the first time in my entire life, I watched Walter Whitfield cry openly in front of another person. We stayed by his bedside for an hour, the conversation slow and careful, circling around the 9 missing years without quite stepping into them. He asked about my business, about Maya's school, about small, safe things. It was my mother who finally broke the surface tension, standing in the doorway with an old shoebox in her hands. "I think it's time," she said quietly to my father. He nodded. She set the box on the small table beside the bed and opened it. Inside were letters, dozens of them, some yellowed with age, all addressed to me but never sent. "Your father wrote to you every year," she said. "On your birthday, he never mailed them. He said he didn't know how to fix what he'd broken, so instead he just wrote." I stared at the box, stunned. 9 years of silence, and this entire time, there had been words waiting, words he never had the courage to send. "Why show me now?" I asked, my voice tighter than I wanted it to be. "Because I'm running out of time to be a coward," my father said. "I was wrong, Daniel. About Naomi. About everything I said at your wedding. I've had 9 years to sit with that mistake, and it's the only thing in my life I regret more than anything else I've ever done." Naomi stood very still beside me, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. I understood why. An apology after 9 years doesn't erase what happened. It doesn't undo the birthdays missed, the empty chair at Thanksgiving, the years Maya grew up without grandparents. "It's not enough," Naomi said quietly, but not cruelly. "I need you to understand that. An apology on your deathbed doesn't erase 9 years. "I know," my father said. "I'm not asking you to forget it. I'm asking for the chance to do better with whatever time I have left." That evening, my mother insisted on making dinner, the way she always had when she wanted to smooth over something difficult. The dining room table, the same one from my childhood, was set for 5 instead of the usual 3. Thomas's chair remained conspicuously absent from the count. "Where is Thomas?" I asked, midway through the meal. My mother and father exchanged a look I recognized immediately, the look of 2 people deciding how much truth to share. "Thomas doesn't know you're here," my mother finally admitted. "We thought it best." "Why?" My father set down his fork, his hands trembling slightly from the effort of sitting upright for so long. "Because your brother has been pressuring me to finalize the estate before I lose the ability to make decisions for myself. He's brought lawyers to this house 3 times in the last month. He wants full control of the company transferred to him before I'm gone. That's his right, isn't it? He's worked there for 20 years. "It's not about the company," my mother said. "Daniel, there's something else your father needs to tell you. Something about the will and about why Thomas has been in such a hurry." My father took a slow breath, the oxygen tube hissing softly with each inhale. "When I built this company, I structured it so that it would eventually be split evenly between both my sons. 50-50, regardless of who worked there and who didn't. I did that because family was supposed to matter more than titles, but Thomas doesn't know that, I guessed. Thomas has always believed the company would be his entirely, because he stayed and you left. He's never known about the 50-50 clause. I never told him, because after the wedding, after everything that happened, I assumed I would change it. I assumed you were gone from this family for good." "But you didn't change it," I said slowly. "No," my father said. "I couldn't bring myself to do it. Every time I sat down with my lawyer to sign the new papers, all I could think about was that county fair photograph your mother carries. I couldn't erase you from this family, Daniel, no matter how angry I was, no matter how much pride stood in the way." The rain had started again outside, tapping softly against the dining room windows. Maya had grown quiet, sensing the seriousness in the room, and had moved to sit closer to Naomi. "So what happens now?" I asked. "Now Thomas is pushing hard to finalize everything before I lose my mental capacity," my father said. "He's hired an aggressive lawyer. He's planning to have me sign new documents this week that would cut you out entirely and consolidate full ownership under his name. He doesn't know I've already told my original lawyer, Patricia, to hold everything as is." "Does he know I'm even alive?" I asked bitterly. "Does he ever ask about me?" My mother's silence answered the question before she spoke. "Thomas believes you chose to walk away from this family. He doesn't fully understand what happened at the wedding, not the way you experienced it. He was young. He followed our lead because that's what we taught him to do. So he's going to be blindsided," I said. "Yes," my father admitted. "And I need you to be there when it happens." Not to gloat, Daniel. Not for revenge. I need my sons to face each other and finally understand each other before I'm not here to referee any of it. I sat back in my chair, the weight of the evening pressing down on me. This wasn't just about reconciliation anymore. This was about walking into a fight I hadn't asked for, standing between my brother's ambition and my father's guilt, with my own family caught somewhere in the middle of it all. When does Thomas expect to finalize the papers? I asked. Friday, my father said. 3 days from now. Naomi reached over and took my hand under the table, grounding me the way she always did when the world tilted too far off balance. We'll be here, she said, answering for both of us before I even had the chance to decide. That night, lying awake in my childhood bedroom with Naomi asleep beside me and Maya in the room down the hall, I thought about the shoebox of unsent letters sitting on my father's nightstand. 9 years of words he never had the courage to send. 9 years of silence that had nearly cost him the chance to make things right at all. I didn't know yet what Friday would bring, or how Thomas would react when he learned the truth about the will, about the years of secrecy, about a brother he thought had abandoned the family for good. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty as I finally drifted towards sleep. Whatever happened in that lawyer's office in 3 days would change everything, for all of us, and there was no walking away from it now. Friday morning arrived gray and cold, the kind of cold that settles into your bones before you even step outside. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror in my childhood home, buttoning a shirt I hadn't worn since my own company's launch meeting 3 years earlier, and tried to steady my hands. You look like you're about to walk into battle, Naomi said from the doorway, Maya's hand in hers. We'd decided, after long discussion the night before, that Maya would stay with my mother during the meeting. Some things an 8-year-old didn't need to witness. Feels like it, I admitted. Patricia Nguyen's office sat on the second floor of a converted brick building downtown, the kind of place that had probably been a bank 100 years ago. My father arrived by wheelchair, pushed by a home health aide, my mother walking beside him, with her hand resting protectively on his shoulder. The trip alone seemed to have cost him what little strength he had left. Thomas was already there when we arrived. He stood by the window, sharp suit, phone in hand, exactly the image of a man who believed he had already won. When he turned and saw me, his expression shifted through confusion, then disbelief, then something harder. "What is he doing here?" Thomas said. Not to me, but to our father. "Sit down, Thomas," my father said, his voice weaker than it used to be but carrying the same old authority. I asked a question. "Daniel is here because this concerns him," my father said. "Sit down." Thomas's eyes moved to me with a mixture of anger and something almost like betrayal, as though I were the one who had done something wrong by simply existing in the same room. 9 years, Thomas said quietly. 9 years, and you show up now. Convenient timing, Daniel. I didn't ask to be here, I said. Dad called me. Patricia cleared her throat and gestured for everyone to sit around the long conference table. My mother helped my father into a chair near the head of the table, arranging a blanket over his knees with the practiced care of someone who had done this 100 times before. "Before we begin," Patricia said, "Mr. Whitfield has asked that I review the current state of the estate documents, as they exist right now, before any new signatures are considered." Thomas straightened in his chair. "We already went through this last week. I thought we were finalizing the transfer today." "There have been developments," Patricia said carefully. She opened a folder and slid a document across the table toward Thomas. I watched my brother's face as he read it, watched the exact moment his expression cracked. 50-50, Thomas read aloud, disbelief flattening his voice. "This says 50-50 ownership, effective from the original filing 11 years ago." He looked up first at Patricia, then at our father. "This can't be right. I've run that company for 2 decades. I built half our client relationships myself. And you're telling me it's always been split evenly with a brother who walked away?" "He didn't walk away, Thomas," Mother said quietly. "We pushed him away. There's a difference." "Don't," Thomas snapped, then caught himself, breathing hard. "Don't rewrite history because you're feeling guilty now that he's dying." "It's not rewriting history," my father said. "It's finally telling the truth, something I should have done years ago." Thomas turned to me, his jaw tight. "Did you know about this? Is that why you're here? You smelled money and came running?" I didn't know, I said, keeping my voice level despite the heat rising in my chest. I found out 3 days ago, the same time I found out Dad was dying. I didn't come here for the company. Thomas. I came because my father asked to see his granddaughter before he passes. Granddaughter, Thomas repeated, something bitter twisting into the word. You have a problem with my daughter, Thomas? I asked, my voice sharpening despite my effort to stay calm. I have a problem with being lied to for 11 years, Thomas shot back. I have a problem with finding out my brother, who abandoned this family, still owns half of everything I've spent my life building. I didn't abandon this family, I said, standing now, unable to stay seated any longer. This family abandoned me. Dad stood up at my wedding and told 200 people he was ashamed of the family I was building. You sat there and said nothing. Mom RSVP'd yes and then walked out before the cake was even cut. Nobody called me for 9 years, Thomas. Not you. Not once. You married outside what this family expected, and you acted shocked when there were consequences, Thomas said. The room went completely still. Even Patricia, who had clearly seen plenty of ugly estate disputes in her career, seemed startled by the rawness of what Thomas had just said out loud. Consequences, I repeated slowly. You mean my wife. You're calling my wife a consequence. Thomas seemed to realize, a beat too late, exactly what he had said and how it sounded. That's not what I meant. That's exactly what you meant, Naomi said, speaking for the first time since we'd entered the room. Her voice was calm, controlled, but I could hear the years of restraint behind it, finally breaking loose. You've spent 9 years letting your parents rewrite this story in whatever way was convenient, Thomas. Let me tell you what actually happened. Your father called our marriage a mistake in front of every person we loved. Your mother RSVP'd for a wedding she never intended to actually attend with an open heart. And you sat silently through all of it because standing up for your brother might have cost you something with this family. Thomas's face had gone pale. I'm not the villain in this story just because I stayed, he said, quieter now. I stayed because somebody had to keep this company running while everyone else's lives fell apart. I stayed because I actually wanted this family's approval, and apparently that makes me the bad guy compared to the son who got to walk away and build something new. My father raised a shaking hand, and something in the gesture silenced the room instantly, the same way it always had at every family dinner during my childhood. Enough, he said. Both of you sit down. We sat. I did this, my father said, his voice heavy with exhaustion. All of this, every bit of pain in this room traces back to decisions I made, thinking I was protecting this family's name, this family's business, this family's future. I was wrong about Daniel's marriage. I was wrong to say what I said at that wedding, and I was wrong to let Thomas believe, for 11 years, that loyalty to this company would be rewarded with something I had already promised to split evenly, long before either of you had proven anything to me. He turned to Thomas. Your work built this company into what it is today. That is real, and it matters, and I will always be grateful for what you sacrificed. But that doesn't erase the fact that your brother is still my son, and Maya is still my granddaughter, and I refuse to die having erased either of them from this family a second time. Thomas's hands were shaking now, his earlier hardness cracking into something rawer. So what happens now? I just accept that everything I've worked for gets cut in half for a brother who wasn't even here. What happens now, my father said, is that the two of you figure out how to run this company together, the way it should have been all along, or you find lawyers to fight it out after I'm gone and destroy everything I built in the process. Those are the only two choices left. The room fell into a heavy, uncertain silence. Patricia quietly closed the folder in front of her, giving us space to sit with the weight of what had just been said. I looked at Thomas across the table, really looked at him for the first time in 9 years. Underneath the anger, underneath the resentment, I saw something I hadn't expected to see. Exhaustion. The same exhaustion I imagined was written across my own face. Two brothers, both shaped by the same difficult father, both carrying different versions of the same wound. I'm not here to take anything from you, Thomas, I said quietly. I built my own company. I don't need half of Dad's business to be okay. But I won't be erased from this family again either. Not after everything it cost me the first time. Thomas didn't answer right away. He stared down at the document in front of him, at the numbers and legal language that represented 2 decades of his life laid bare on paper. I need time, he finally said. That's fair, I said. My father closed his eyes, visibly drained by the effort of the last hour. My mother moved quickly to his side, checking the oxygen line, her hands trembling with worry. I think that's enough for today, Patricia said gently. We can reconvene when everyone has had time to process. As the meeting broke apart, Thomas lingered by the door, watching me gather my coat. For a moment I thought he might say something else, something angrier, something final. Instead, he asked quietly, "What's she like, your daughter?" The question caught me off guard. "She's smart," I said carefully. "Stubborn, kind. She asked me last week why our family didn't want her in it." Something shifted behind Thomas's eyes, guilt or grief. I couldn't quite tell which. "What did you tell her?" "I told her it wasn't her fault, that it was never about her." Thomas nodded slowly, then walked out without another word, leaving me standing there uncertain whether anything between us had actually changed, or whether 9 years of silence had simply found a new, more complicated shape. That night, back at my parents' house, my mother handed me the shoebox of unsent letters again. "Read them," she said. "Whatever happens with Thomas, whatever happens with the business, your father needs you to know what was in his heart these past 9 years, even when he was too proud to say it out loud." I sat alone in the guest room long after Naomi and Maya had fallen asleep, opening letter after letter in my father's careful handwriting, each one dated on my birthday, each one beginning the same way. "Dear Daniel, I am sorry. By the time I finished the last letter, the sun was beginning to rise outside the window, and I understood for the first time the true weight of everything my family had lost and everything we still had a chance to save." 2 weeks passed before Thomas called. I was in my home office, going over shipping contracts. When my phone lit up with his name for the first time in 9 years, I stared at it for a long moment before answering, half expecting it to be a wrong number, some strange glitch in the universe. "Thomas, I've been thinking," he said. No greeting, straight to the point, the way our father always spoke when something mattered. "About what you said. About not wanting to take anything from me. I meant it." "I know," he said, and something in his voice had softened since the lawyer's office. "I talked to my therapist about it. First time I've done that in about 6 years. She said something that stuck with me. She said I've spent so long being angry at you for leaving that I never let myself be angry at the people who actually pushed you out." I sat back in my chair, letting that settle. "That's a hard thing to admit." "Yeah, well, dying fathers have a way of forcing honesty," Thomas said, and there was the faintest trace of dark humor in it, the kind of humor that only survives in a family that has learned to laugh through pain because the alternative is drowning in it. "So where does that leave us?" I asked. "I want to meet Maya," he said. "If that's all right, I want to actually know my niece, instead of finding out about her for the first time in a lawyer's office." I felt something loosen in my chest that had been tight for 9 years. "She'd like that. She's been asking a lot of questions." "And Naomi," Thomas added more carefully now. "I owe her an apology. What I said in that meeting, about consequences, that wasn't right. That wasn't fair to her, and it wasn't fair to you. She'll want to hear that from you directly," I said. "Not through me." "I know. I'm working up to it." My father's condition worsened faster than the doctors had predicted. By the following month, he had been moved from the sunroom to an actual hospital, machines humming steadily around him, the kind of quiet that settles into a room when everyone understands time is short. I visited every weekend, sometimes bringing Maya, sometimes coming alone when the conversations needed to happen between just the two of us. We talked about things we'd never discussed before: his childhood, growing up poor in a mill town 2 hours north, the fear that had driven him his whole life, the fear of losing everything he'd built, the fear that had somehow curdled into the very prejudice that nearly cost him his entire family. "I used to think strength meant never admitting you were wrong," he told me one afternoon, his voice thin but steady. "Your mother tried to tell me otherwise for 40 years. Took me dying to finally listen." "Better late than never," I said, and he managed a weak laugh. "Bring Maya this weekend," he said. "I want to hear her laugh again." "I've got a limited number of Saturdays left, Daniel. I don't want to waste any of them." Thomas came too that weekend, sitting on the opposite side of the hospital bed from me, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, our father had both his sons in the same room without an argument hanging over it. Maya climbed carefully onto the edge of the bed and showed our father a drawing she'd made at school. A family tree with construction paper leaves, one branch reaching all the way to a stick figure labeled Grandpa Walter. "You put me on there," my father said, his voice breaking. "You're my grandpa," Maya said simply, as though this were the most obvious fact in the world, as though 9 years of silence and one ugly wedding speech had never happened at all. Children have a way of cutting straight through complexity to the truth underneath. The following week, Thomas and I sat down with Patricia together, without our parents present, to work out the actual terms of running the company jointly. It wasn't easy. We argued over structure, over roles, over how much control each of us would have in decisions neither of us had discussed in nearly a decade. But we argued as brothers now, not as strangers wearing familiar faces. "I want to keep running daily operations," Thomas said. "That's what I know. That's what I've built expertise in." "That's fine," I said. "I've got my own company. I'm not looking to run yours. I want a voice in the bigger decisions, and I want the profit split to reflect what Dad always intended. But the day-to-day is yours." Thomas studied me across the table, something like relief crossing his face. "You're serious. You really don't want to take this from me." "I never did," I said. "I just didn't want to be erased from this family a second time. That's all I ever wanted, Thomas. To not be erased." We shook hands that day, an oddly formal gesture between brothers, but it felt necessary somehow, like sealing something that had been broken for too long. My father passed away on a quiet Tuesday morning in early spring, 3 months after my mother first knocked on my door. I was there, along with Naomi, Maya, Thomas, and my mother. All of us gathered around his bed in the gray hour just before dawn. His last words were quiet, almost too soft to hear. "Thank you for coming home." My mother held his hand until the machines went silent, and none of us moved for a long time afterward, the weight of the moment too large to rush through. At the funeral, Thomas asked me to speak alongside him. We stood together at the front of the church, something we hadn't done since we were boys serving as ring bearers at a cousin's wedding decades earlier. "My father spent most of his life afraid," I told the gathered crowd. "Afraid of what other people would think. Afraid of losing what he'd built. That fear cost him 9 years with me. 9 years he can never get back. But in his final months, he found the courage to be afraid of something else instead. He became afraid of dying without making things right. And because of that fear, I got my father back, even if only for a little while. I got to watch him hold his granddaughter. I got to hear him apologize, really apologize, not just for what he said, but for who he had been." Thomas spoke after me, his voice steadier than I expected. "My brother and I spent 9 years as strangers because of decisions our father made. Decisions I was too afraid to challenge at the time. I regret that silence more than almost anything in my life. But I'm grateful, more grateful than I can say, that we found our way back to each other before it was too late. That's the lesson my father left us, even if he didn't mean to teach it this way. Pride costs more than any of us can afford. Love is the only thing worth being stubborn about." 6 months after the funeral, we held a family dinner. A real one, the first in nearly a decade. My mother's dining room table, the same one from my childhood, set for 6 now instead of 5. Thomas brought his wife, whom I was meeting properly for the first time. Maya sat between my mother and Naomi, chattering about a school project, completely unbothered by the years of complicated history surrounding the table. My mother stood to make a toast, something she had never done in all my years growing up in that house. "I spent 9 years afraid to call my own son," she said, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. "I let pride and fear cost me nearly a decade with my grandchild. I don't have an excuse good enough to explain that away. All I can offer is what's left. Whatever years I have remaining, I intend to spend them showing up, fully, for every single person at this table." She raised her glass toward Naomi. "I was wrong about you the moment I met you. You have been a better daughter to this family than I ever deserved, showing up here despite everything, for the sake of my granddaughter, and for the sake of a husband who needed his family back. Thank you." Naomi's eyes glistened, but she raised her glass in return. "To second chances," she said, "even the ones we don't think we deserve." We drank to that, all 6 of us, the rain falling softly outside the dining room windows, the same rain that had been falling the night my mother first appeared on my porch, with a suitcase and 9 years of regret. Later that night, driving home with Maya asleep in the back seat and Naomi's hand resting quietly in mine, I thought about the letters still sitting in a shoebox on my dresser. 40 of them, one for every birthday my father had missed while too proud to send them. I thought about how close we had come to losing each other permanently, how a single evening of pride at a wedding nearly cost an entire family the chance to know itself fully. And I thought about Maya, growing up now with grandparents who knew her name, an uncle who asked about her school projects, a family tree with every branch finally accounted for. Some wounds never fully heal. 9 years leave scars that don't disappear just because the story ends well. But I learned something that spring I don't think I would have understood any other way. Forgiveness isn't about pretending the hurt never happened. It's about deciding that love is worth more than being right, worth more than pride, worth more than 9 years of silence that almost became forever. My father died knowing his family, truly knowing it for the first time in years. And I got to spend the rest of my life making sure that his granddaughter would never once wonder if she belonged. That, in the end, was worth more than any inheritance the lawyers could have divided.